So another adjusting entries that we will talk about are the prepaid expenses. So what are these prepayments? Prepayments are simply the advance payments of the company. Since these are advances, these are not yet incurred, meaning hindi pa nagagamit. So how do companies record these prepaid expenses? So there are two methods, the expense method and the asset method. Let's start with the expense method. So sa tuwing may advance payments tayo or cash disbursements, these are initially debited to an expense account. So for example, a company made an advance payment on its rental payments. So paano natin i-record ito? So we will debit it to an expense account. So we debit it to rent expense and we credit cash. So at year end, the amount to be recorded in the adjusting entries is the unexpired portion. So to record, we will debit a prepaid rent and credit rent expense. Next method is the asset method. In here, cash disbursement are initially debited to asset account. To record advance payments, we debit prepaid rent and credit cash. So at year end, the amount to be recorded in the adjusting entries is the expired portion. So this expired portion is yung amount of advance payments or rental payments na nagamit na or na-incurred. So accrual basis of accounting is also used in here because expenses are only recorded when incurred by the business. So that's why adjusting entries are made in order to update the correct balances of expense account. Always remember that when making adjustments to prepaid expenses, the debit is always opposite the method. So anong ibig sabihin nito? Yung debit na tinutukoy niya dito is debit in the adjusting entries. So in the first method, the expense method, by year end, the adjusting entries will be a debit to prepaid rent. On the other hand, the asset method, by year end adjusting entries, the debit would be a rent expense. Always remember this para mapadali yung buhay natin when making adjusting entries. So to further understand the adjusting entries to be made and prepaid expenses, let's have some sample transactions. The first one, an entity prepays a 20,000 one-year rent on October 1, 2019. The requirement is to prepare the year-end adjusting entries under each method. We're going to compare the expense method and the asset method. So we're going to start with the expense method. So the original entry to be made upon payment of advance rental is we debit a rent expense amounting to 20,000. So we debit rent expense, the rent expense account since we are under the expense method amounting to 20,000. And we credit cash since we paid for advance rentals amounting to 20,000. Adjusting entries are made at year end. The 20,000 is a one-year rent. The adjusting entries would be from October 1, 2019 up to December 31, 2019. From October, November, and December, so 3 months na yung na-incurred. So in the adjusting entries under the expense method, we record the unexpired portion. So meaning 3 months pa lang yung nagagamit out of 12 months. Since expense method is used by adjusting entries, the debit would be opposite the method. So we debit a prepaid rent and credit rent expense in order to reduce the expense account. So out of the 20,000, the unexpired portion is still 9 months since 3 months lang yung nagamit out of the 1-year rent. So to compute for that, 20,000 times 9 divided by 12 will give us an amount of 15,000. So out of the 20,000, 15,000 pa yung unexpired. Next step is preparation of the adjustments under the asset method. In the asset method, we initially record the cash disbursement to an asset account. So the original entry to be made will be a debit to prepaid rent. Prepaid rent is an asset account amounting to 20,000 and credit cash amounting to 20,000 as well. So the adjusting entries to be recorded at year end is, since asset method tayo, the opposite would be expense account, so we debit it to rent expense. And we credit prepaid rent. So in here, the amount to be recorded is the expired portion. So out of the 20,000, 3 months pa lang yung na-incurred. So 20,000 times 3 over 12. So let us compute for that. 20,000 times 3 divided by 12 is 5,000. So this 5,000 is the expired portion. So we're done with the two methods in recording prepaid expenses. Regardless of the method used, whether expense or asset method, this will give us the same balance of expense and asset account. So let us make a T account in order to determine their balances. First is the rent expense. So in the original entry, we debit 20,000, and by adjusting entries, we credit 15,000. Simply deduct 20 from 15, this will give us an amount of rent expense which is 5,000. Next is the prepaid rent. So we only have one transaction affecting this, which is yung adjusting entry, a debit to 15,000. So the balance of prepaid rent is 15,000. So doon naman tayo sa asset method. First is we determine the balance of prepaid rent. So we debit prepaid rent amounting to 20,000 and credit 5,000, which is from the adjusting entries. So the balance is 15,000. So next would be the rent expense. So the only transaction affecting this is the adjusting entries, wherein we debit 5,000. So the balance is 5,000. So regardless of the method used, the rent expense will be equal, which is 5,000, and the prepaid rent is 15,000. Always remember these ways on how to make adjustments of prepayments.